Throughout the ages, betrayal between lovers was never treated as a private misstep. It was viewed as an assault on order, lineage, and sacred authority. When women were accused of unfaithfulness, justice did not arrive softly. It came with flame, stone, rope, and steel. Cultures across continents created punishments, so severe they became tools of terror, warnings etched into collective memory. These acts were not impulsive fury. They were engineered systems of dominance, upheld by rulers, clergy, and law itself. What followed was not sympathy, but rehearsed brutality. And within that brutality, societies exposed the values they truly lived by. This was a legacy of punishment when love turned into treachery, suffocated in the sack in medieval Germany. From the 13th to the 16th century, throughout the Holy Roman Empire, one of the most terrifying penalties imposed on women accused of adultery was sack drowning, known as sackung. This method of execution appeared in numerous regional law codes and was practiced in areas of southern Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The sentence was never hidden away, nor was it uncommon. It was a public ordeal, a lawful ritual, and a moral threat. The Saxenspiegel, a 13th-century German legal text assembled by Eich von Repgau, defined female adultery as a direct wound to a husband's honor and his household. While men accused of infidelity often faced fines or embarrassment, women were condemned to lethal physical punishment. The Carolina, the 1532 criminal code issued by Emperor Charles V, stated that a woman who violates a marriage bond to adultery may be executed by drowning according to local tradition. The sentenced woman would be tied and stitched inside a weighted sack, sometimes filled with stones or even live animals such as dogs or cats, and thrown into the nearest river. In cities like Nuremberg and Augsburg, the punishment was performed with grim formality. Officials and townspeople looked on as the woman fought within the smothering darkness of the sack, unable to cry out, thrash, or beg. Dying this way was slow, confusing, and absolute. Her body was often left to drift downstream, serving as a harsh reminder. Drowning was commonly regarded as less bloody, and therefore more suitable for women. Yet the ceremonial nature of sack drowning shows it was anything but gentle. Its purpose was to strip the condemned of selfhood, expression, and worth. Women accused of adultery were viewed as tainting the moral and social order, and thus were discarded like refuse, swallowed by water, removed in silence. This sentence exposes the gender brutality of medieval law. The woman was not only killed, but erased, kept out of sight, denied a grave, and silenced in both life and death. Burned alive in the town square, Europe's public justice. In late medieval and early modern Europe, executions by fire were not merely punishments. They were staged performances of state authority, moral purification, and social discipline. For women charged with adultery, especially when linked with accusations of witchcraft, heresy, or unchaste behavior, burning alive became one of the harshest penalties. Flame, in the minds of rulers, served as a cleaner, and the woman's body, once judged as violating expected virtue, was considered worthy only of destruction. By the 14th and 15th centuries, cities throughout France, the Holy Roman Empire, and sections of Spain recorded burnings of women condemned for marital betrayal. In 1431, for example, legal documents from Rouen, France, note that women could be executed by fire for what was often vaguely labeled immoral behavior. Though adultery itself did not always merit burning, it was commonly treated as an aggravating charge when authorities sought to defend severe punishment. The Malleus Maleficarum, 1487, a theological and judicial guide used in which prosecutions openly tied women's moral failings to spiritual corruption. If a woman was known to have broken her marital vows, especially if she did so publicly or with a man of lower rank, she could quickly be portrayed as a threat to the moral order. Accusations expanded rapidly. A woman once named adulteress might be cast as a temptress, a blasphemer, or even a witch. And for such women, fire awaited. Executions occurred in the town square, often during market days. The woman would be clothed in a plain shift, bound to a wooden stake, and encircled by piles of dry timber. Crowds gathered not merely to watch, but to internalize the warning. A woman's personal behavior was viewed as belonging to her husband and her community, never to herself. Clerics preached sermons. Town criers proclaimed the accusations. And then the fire was set. Burning alive was an extended, terrifying death. Flames consumed the lower body first, then crept upward. If the executioner chose to show mercy, he might strangle the woman beforehand or use damp wood to create smoke and dull the suffering. But mercy was never assured. Any screams she made were often swallowed by the crowd's noise and the crackle of burning timber. Stoned to death under Babylonian law. Around 1754 BCE, during the rule of King Hammurabi in ancient Mesopotamia, one of the earliest legal systems in world history was carved into stone, the Code of Hammurabi. This Babylonian code, unearthed in Susa and now displayed in the Louvre, details harsh and deeply gendered punishments for moral offenses. Among them, adultery by a married woman was treated as a capital crime, punishable by death through stoning or drowning. Law Section 129 declares, "If the wife of a man is caught lying with another man, they shall bind them and throw them into the water. If the husband spares his wife, then the king shall spare his servant." This ruling highlights two defining features of Babylonian justice: the husband's absolute authority over his wife's body and fate, and the expectation that both the woman and her lover would be executed. But unlike the man, who might be forgiven or penalized financially, the woman's punishment was almost always death. Although drowning was a formal sentence, stoning was widely practiced across Mesopotamian states, especially when punishment needed to be more public and communal. Archaeological records and legal writings from the neighboring Assyrians confirm that stoning adulterous women served as a shared ritual of moral cleansing. The condemned woman would be taken to the city's outskirts or a public square, stripped of clothing and status, and placed in a pit or bound to a post. Then, men of the community, often including elders and the husband, hurled stones until she collapsed from blows or slipped into unconsciousness. The punishment was intentionally slow, degrading, and symbolic. Stones were used because they demanded prolonged violence from many participants, transforming execution into a communal declaration of justice. The woman, once part of the household and community, was now reduced to a criminal body destroyed by those who once shielded her. To the Babylonian state, adultery committed by a woman was not only treachery. It represented cosmic disruption, and her stoning was believed necessary to restore social and divine order. There was no jury, no appeal. The stones determined the end. Public pillory and flogging in colonial America. During the 17th and 18th centuries, throughout the Puritan settlements of colonial America, adultery was more than a moral failing. It was a public offense. Colonial law, especially in Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, and Virginia, drew heavily from Old Testament teachings, viewing female infidelity as a direct challenge to both divine and social order. By the 1700s, execution for adultery had become rare, but public humiliation and corporal punishment were the main tools for enforcing moral conduct. The most infamous were the pillory and the whipping post. Under Massachusetts Body of Liberties, 1641, adultery was formally a capital crime. If any man shall commit adultery with a married or espoused wife, the adulterer and adulteress shall surely be put to death. In reality, most colonies replaced execution with harsh public lashings and prolonged exposure in the pillory. Women bore the heaviest burden of these punishments. Courts were far more likely to prosecute them than men, particularly if pregnancy revealed the offense. In towns such as Boston, Salem, and Williamsburg, convicted women were clothed in plain garments, bound to a whipping post, and struck 39 times across the upper back, often in full view of neighbors, clergy, and even their husbands. Afterwards, they were confined in the pillory, a wooden frame that secured the head and hands, leaving them exposed for hours while passers-by hurled insults, refuse, or stones. These punishments were designed not merely to inflict pain, but to destroy reputation, the ultimate social death in Puritan society. Women were also sometimes forced to wear a sewn letter, A, a real practice long predating Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, 1850. This branded symbol marked them for years, ensuring the disgrace of adultery could never be erased. Colonial diarists like Samuel Sewall recorded such punishments matter-of-factly, noting a woman was whipped for fornication, in the presence of many, a stark reminder of how normalized such spectacles were. These punishments served as much to deter as to punish. The screams, the blood, the mockery, all were instruments of moral enforcement. In colonial America, A woman's body became a canvas on which society inscribed its codes of virtue, one lash at a time. Across centuries and cultures, the female body was a battlefield for moral authority, scarred, silenced, and sacrificed to maintain patriarchal dominance. These punishments were not isolated acts of cruelty, but systemic mechanisms used to enforce social hierarchies and religious mandates, making brutal examples of women who defied them. Which of these punishments had the most enduring social effect? And why? Comment below. Let the lessons of history remind us. When morality is imposed through suffering, justice is the first casualty.